So first of all, thank you, Alexander, for inviting me to participate in this Biennale, and of course the whole team, also Patricia and the others, but especially Alexander was my link. We know each other for years. And so, yeah, at first I rejected the invitation because I didn't want to have anything to do with AI. But then, for insistence, I thought, well, maybe something interesting could come out of it, and that whole manifesto has come out of it, which is what I've been presenting here. So you were not at the performance, right, yesterday, Metaformance? Have you seen the video at the exhibition, maybe? Well, there's a video of mine at
the one in the cubicle?
It's the one with naked dances with a spoken text behind. Probably not. Okay. Well, these are the two works. I mean, the video was made specifically for the Biennale. And I will come to it later, like I will come to the Metaformance that I presented yesterday. But before that, in order to kind of clarify the stakes of my proposal and the strength of my refusal, I wanted precisely to frame it in my 25 years of career as media artist and media theorist and philosopher. So I want to explain, like, how did a vegan, queer, anarcho-primitivist end up at an AI and Art Biennale? And precisely coming from 25 years of working with new media. But so I will show the whole process of gradual disalignment and taking distance from all sorts of media, and so how I'm focusing more and more on just what I call, following anthropologist Marcel Mauss, the techniques of the body, which is what the body can do with its movement, perception, and voice. Which is what I showed in the video of the exhibition. This is the video is partly a kind of documentary of my actual current process of becoming. Of course, the video itself is contradictory with that process. It is a way, of course, of sharing a conversation as part of a gradual disalignment, gradual distance. So I will first go through a bit of history of some of the things I've been doing, in which the body was always central. But it was still, much of that work for 25 years was still with, many kinds of media, but very strongly focusing on so-called new media, digital media, and so forth, especially interactive media with dance and technology and things like that. Like I've been collaborating a lot with Jean-Marc Matos, whom you've been seeing here. I don't know if you were in but so we've been sharing that field of dance and technology also. Oh, he's more focused just on that. And so my work has always been also in the middle, in between art practices, philosophy, because I do that as well, like producing theory, and activism. So it's always very intermingled. Like many of the concepts of my theory come from my embodied art practices, and they feedback then with the theory. Another important concept is that I never produce works. I do long-term processes where I develop techniques and ecosystems with which I improvise. So I develop improvisation techniques and the tools and instruments and ecosystems that compose many layers of more complex ecosystems. And I will show part of it. It's also what one would call ontological art, because I'm really trying to challenge concepts such as invent what we think space is, the body is, and so forth, perception. So that is the purpose of so-called Metaformance. What I was sharing yesterday here is not called a performance because, well, the first part, this particular one is a bit more theatrical at the beginning, which would be still performatic, but then the second part, which is a kind of ritualistic, immersive experience for the audience, where I try to blur the boundaries of the audience, that's really a Metaformance insofar as I am mediating an experience which is aiming at a deep perceptual transformation of everyone involved towards, well, some of the things I will be mentioning later, towards, well, a kind of relational ecology where we are no longer kind of subjects distanced from one another, but bodies entangled in webs, in meshes of movement and indeterminate relationalities. This is my work about creating conditions for this kind of thing. So here I am taking distance from many things and trying to reverse at the same time many other things as well. So just a little bit of history, so that to to strengthen precisely my current refusal of AI, that you see a bit where I come from. Well, metahumanism is one of the names for the philosophy I developed, which is a branch of critical posthumanism. Metaformance is more like focused on not just the aesthetics, but mostly. And so they evolved mostly since 2001, so basically 25 years, which is when I started to do hybrid performances at the time with dance and technology. They were the first projects from 2001 onwards. So they have a whole kind of evolution that has converged in ecosystems of multiple layers. On the one hand, projects where I was playing there on top with how the body can leave a trail in space, first through photography, just long-term exposures, then through interactive video, and then how this could become actual 3D digital meshes that always, so the movement of the body creating this dynamic space. This is already part of so-called ontological art, because I was trying to challenge the Cartesian conception of space. So the wrong idea, for me, wrong idea that space is there, pre-existing. So this comes from Newton and Descartes, basically. This is a complete fallacy, in my view, and a very problematic one that has created a completely measurable account of the world, which is crucially underlying the current eco-social collapse. We will come back to that later if we have the time. So I was trying to really rethink completely how is it that space comes from movement. For me, there is only movement. Movement is not of something. Things are just effects of movement, if you want. And so is space. So how can we reinvent space as a dynamic mesh that emerges from movement? So this was already going on for different years. This later, in a project I will mention later on, took a physical side. So what I was presenting yesterday here, the hang model, you didn't see the others saw it. The hanging structure was a foldable, translucent structure. This is a technique called flexodynamics. I call it like that. I developed it. I built them myself, and they are foldable, dynamic, physical structures, which is again a physical take on how to do this concept of space dynamic, something that comes from and with the movement, rather than pre-existing. On the other hand, I've been also many years working with close-ups of the body, first with video and photography, but then really only live, because what got interesting is now I was looking at myself, like changing the perception of myself as I saw myself live with cameras on the skin. And so this was one of the crucial inflections in my work, and so for many years I was doing this transgender cyber performance. Well, yesterday I almost involved it because it's one of the layers of the tool, but then I decided not to because the analog image was a bit weak. So the signals. So, but then this is I call it microsexes. It's my own post-queer take on dissolving gender construct or sex constructs, so that the cameras placed on the skin give the body, give to your own body a completely amorphous and transformed perception of oneself. And I do this like while walking around naked in the streets with 20 kilos of equipment and projecting on the buildings, or in immersive situations indoors where I engage with the audience through the cameras on the skin, and in all sorts of, even online, or going to private homes like a kind of alien micro-sex worker, and things like that. So that has been evolving for many years as well. And that also, at some point, went totally inwards in the sense of this is the most important part of my work. Developing movement techniques, improvisation techniques. So what I call disalignments are improvisation techniques that have to do with focusing on proprioception, which is the most important sense we have. Almost no one knows it because it's been ignored. But I focus on my philosophy on that. I redefine completely what bodies and perception are through the sense of proprioception. It is this amorphous, internal, distributed mesh of sensors that is self-organized in the body, of which the brain is just part, which gives you the sense of self, but as a sense of moving body. It's what allows the body to know its posture and movement, but without a rational self necessarily governing anything at all. So I focus on this as a source for regaining variability in movement that we have lost in sedentary environments, which is again part of what I see as underlying the current ecological collapse. I will talk later, if we have the time, of how over millennia, since the Neolithic at least, but with even much older roots, I think at least, in fact, maybe a couple of million years. So since we started systematically externalizing ourselves in techniques, many animals use tools, but we started to do this in a very systematic form and then gradually growing and then exponentially growing since a very long time, even before the sapiens existed. So I see the origins of our failure, evolutionary failure, which is what I think we have to acknowledge today, and which is not normally acknowledged due to the psychosis of human supremacism, has to do partly with this failed history of an animal that has externalized itself in tools, that this has created a sensory alienation from the environment. And this has created an externalization that has increasingly intervened in aggressive ways in the environment. And now AI is, of course, well, together with spacescape, the foremost expression of these, the tendency to autonomy of these aggressive externalization that pretends to supplant the world in its entirety. This will not come. What is coming is ecosocial collapse. So if you haven't heard of this, if you didn't believe in this, I advise you to do so, because otherwise you're going to have very hard times. So I will share you my mutation in face of this problem, which is this anarcho-primitivist shift of my recent years, where I am actually becoming, as I show in that video in the exhibition, a gatherer. I'm learning to gather eatable plants, like many of the green things you see out there, anywhere, in every corner of every street. And of course in the countryside are mostly eatable plants. This is, the sapiens was for most of its history, for 300,000 years, almost all of our history, we were only nomadic gatherer-hunters, and apparently these societies were far better, according to much of anthropology, than whatever came after agriculture. Well, this is reversing human supremacist discourses about the superiority of this kind of civilization. However, I will be challenging, hopefully, and I invite you to a discussion on this precisely, more focusing later on my manifesto, Refusal of AI, two major fallacies. One is the fallacy that this kind of exploitative, sedentary, proprietary civilization is better, therefore more desirable than other modes of existence that there have been and can be. The other is that any of this has any future whatsoever. Because if one does research like I do in the climate crisis and many other aspects of it, not just the climate collapse, but the biodiversity collapse and the planetary boundaries crisis and many other aspects entangled with the social crisis and the animal crisis and so forth, then it's pretty clear that none of this has any future whatsoever. Whoever believes this should really ground their argumentation in deep study, rather than in supremacist beliefs, which is what I get around me all the time. There's no serious reason to believe that any of what we know of dominant civilizations can continue existing any much further beyond the middle of this century, not even the end of this century. If you think I am a crazy catastrophist, we can have a serious discussion about this. So, okay, let's move on. So all of these are kind of layers of four main layers, like the 3D, the physical structures, the disalignment movement techniques, and then this microsex project with the counters on the skin, which is also hacking the fixed point of vision we have inherited from the Renaissance, this way in which we place ourselves all the time in a fixed point of view that distances us from. This is another ontological hacking of technology, right? These are four layers that can then get together and form these nomadic interventions that are very often outdoors and collective, choral outdoors interventions, which are called metatropias, which are different kinds of mixtures of all of this, right? But again, as I say, I've been, in the more recent years, I've been gradually putting more and more to the background whatever involves unsustainable technologies. We'll later come back to that. What is really sustainable technology and technique? My conclusion, I advance you, is that the only really sustainable thing is what the body can do. Techniques of the body, as Marshall Mauss would say, what you can do with your movement, with your perception, with your sounds. That's it. Forget about anything else. We can discuss this later, of course. And I've done long reflections on this, having been engaged myself with the full spectrum from kind of sophisticated digital media through mechanical media like photographic machines or piano. I'm a musician as well. Through other tools like painting, which is already the extractivism behind a pigment or a canvas and so forth. All of that even is problematic. And then of course the thing about the body, what you can do through moving, sensing, and sounding, which is what I propose as the way to go. Okay, and which is far more enriching that way. Well, there are many talk in itself, different kinds of art that I relate to Metaformance, different artists and so forth. But I think we don't have time for this. Well, I will just quickly go through some of these images of some of these projects. The microsensors project, where I was mentioning I have these cameras on the skin, where the body sees itself in a new way. So the important thing is here how you change your own perception of yourself. This is a shift to Metaformance, right? It's not a show for others to just watch. So then if there's an audience, the challenge is to engage with the audience in a way that they stop being an audience. Like here I am interacting one-to-one. This is my favorite format, one-to-one in an intimate encounter with the audience. The Morphogenesis project is this one with the digital architectures, where I am wearing sensors on the body that transform these amorphous meshes. So it's a space that is never fully there to navigate. It's constantly transforming. So all of this only makes sense in the context of the whole conception. It's never like a gadget I can put out there for people to use no matter how. It's part of the whole improvisation practice and process. It works with all sorts of people. Like I do many activities with, other abled people, with micro movements, right? It actually enhances, so to speak, I don't like that word, like amplifies the sensation of movement for people who have smaller movements. Because any tiny movement you do becomes an enormous transformation in these architectures. So up there you have the original analog photographies that I was doing 25 years ago, from which this idea of an emergent space came about. Okay, the disalignment. So this is like one of my first workshops in Chile for this technique around 2012, where we always go out into the streets, and where we develop this improvisation practice based on putting the controlling subject out of the stage and letting the body move without rational control and unfolding its endless variability of combinations of all its 360 joints in contact between one another, with the world, and so forth. It's really regaining a whole sense of plasticity, movement, and perception that we have completely lost. Now I am connecting this with self-rewilding, becoming an animal, like living outdoors, like I do most of the winter where I come from now, which is what I show in this video in the exhibition, where I spend as much time outdoors as I can, not yet fully, so in the future hopefully without even a mobile home, and learning more and more about eatable plants. And that's really where this makes sense. It doesn't make sense anymore to me, any of these practices, when they are just palliative practices of the human for the human, of the bourgeois artist for other people who want to feel cool because they have seen a radical performance in a gallery, and then they go on with their shitty lives. This is what I now completely oppose. I don't want to have anything to do anymore with this palliative kind of art, where the human is just all the time self-celebrating its own cosmic idiocy, and its collapse, and its failure. I want transformative arts that are transforming all of life, and not just putting palliative patches on the sinking Titanic. I've been there, so much of what I'm showing was still there. It was still part of this, okay, we have a full performance, people are happy, then they go home with their shitty lives. And nothing changed. Like you can go to have your yoga lesson once a week and then nothing changes. Like, you feel better, yeah, of course. But I think that's not transforming the whole of things as they need to get transformed, given the challenge we have with us. So these are workshops I've been doing for all these years in many different cities, where we go out and first it's indoors, maybe, to develop a focus, but more and more we just do these nomadic outdoors interventions. And it has endless variabilities. I don't have time now, but in my book trilogy on hackers, there's a more detailed description of this practice. So since 2013, where I started coordinating a very large EU-funded project called Metabody, which is also my central concept. Metabody means the body as something that is always transforming and that is relational and symbiotic. So rethinking all of reality in terms of such processes. There are no entities, there are only processes of relations of movement and transformation. But they are persistent in their openness. This is the crucial thing. So this is where I started developing this technique for building foldable structures that are constantly moving in connection with the body. You also feel them through your muscles, your proprioception. All sorts of experiments of different kinds. Let me just check. Even involving robotics at some point. This is so subtle that didn't get full development. It's used in some time so that the structures move on their own with little motors that can be connected also to sensors that people wear or just move on their own as well. So you see floating on the canals of the hay, all sorts of experiences. And then bigger structures, which are always site-specific, and then in rural areas around where I have a studio in the village of rural Spain, and I did a tour in different villages there, for example, always setting this thing up, Metatopia, in different ways. So there was always this nomadic, trying to create a nomadic space, spatial intervention of movement, multisensory integration, and of course the moving body as the central part of it all. These are interventions I've done in a gate right in Madrid. And the metatopias are the kind of mixture of it all I've been showing already. When different layers of these techniques come together to form an ecosystem or an intervention of some kind. Well, the challenge is to do away with this idea of an external audience anyway. And it's not always easy, of course. You have to fight against the existing divide in current society, and in fact since ancient Greece, 2,600 years, we have a spectacular divide. So it's something that is inherited. It's not always easy to work against that divide. I do workshops like this was in a refugee camp in Lesbos years ago, building kinds of structures with bamboo caves and recycled materials, things like that. Or in another refugee camp in The Hague, also building, and this was in the Amazon. And then more recently, from 2022 till 2025, there was this other European project where Alexander was also involved, where we were playing more of the collective, the choral. Choros in Greek is the chorus. The chorus is the group of dancing, singing bodies that in ancient Greece was central to the society. This is a fascinating issue. But then I realized in my research on this, which I expanded on in my book trilogy on hackers, that actually collective dance has been the spine of human societies and non-human, like, flocks of birds. So moving together as the spine of the society, not talking, moving together, until this got extinct. And this, for me, has been part of our tragedy, of our failure. Right? So I'm proposing new ways of regaining this collective movement as source for an open-ended social body that is, again, not just human for the sake of human, but more symbiotic. We're learning to move with the ecosystems as well. But in this project, still, I was playing more skeptically, but after the pandemic, with Jean-Marc Matos, we had been doing lots of experimentation since 2020 intimacy with telematics, which I had already done years before. So these techniques I had been showing previously, we started to do telematic versions of all of them. Now I'm really even more skeptical about that. But we did go into that for a few years. So trying to connect bodies at a distance, whether with the structures where, for example, this was very linked to the pandemic, I called this the telematic embrace, where I can be in one country inside one of these structures, and someone else from a different country is using sensors on the body and doing a gesture like this, and then the structure around me in the other country is embracing me. So the little motors in the structure here are moving, and the structure embraces me while the other person in another country is doing this gesture. Things like that. And then also like connecting doing the disalignments at a distance. And then we focus on our relation to the camera and really exploring the limitations of the visual pyramid, playing with it and doing a telematic disalignment. So we've really worked through all of this in so many different ways. Also with close-ups, then in other ways as well. Planetary embrace, this is the one I was saying. You see, this is one person in one country, this is me in another country. And this alien intimacy where we connect people from different countries and then dance together and compose disalignments together at a distance. I mean, all of this can be enriching and interesting. It's never like, being here together. But, so, of course, you have to deal with technical issues and different kinds. It's difficult to get the people together. There's localness always tends to be more important. But here again, we are dancing live together from 4 countries. We are merging the images and we are moving as we see ourselves in the processed image. You see different people connecting. And then the images get processed live as we dance live together. We normally, when doing this with Jean-Marc and Toulouse, we have a local group doing itself a choral interaction in France, and then people from other countries connecting at the same time as well. This is also a telematic version of this digital architectures I was talking about before. Where this is a preliminary scene where you can see each color is relating to someone from a different country or city, connecting live to the same situation. Here we were using the phones as interface so that people from a distance could connect. And so through their phone sensors, they could transform these architectures. You see? By moving. But then it would get more complex, not just with 4 different colors, right? So we have a local group in Toulouse, and then like 3 people connecting from Greece and Italy. This is what we were calling the abstract avatar, or the amorphous avatar, where we transpose our movement in a non-linear way. And we connect, like they are all machines for regaining a lost sense of symbiosis. The thing is, you can also do it without. But when using it, less and less, they're about that. It's a provisional tool for regaining a lost sense of connection and variation and plasticity and indeterminacy. So I could talk long, but we don't have the time, on how I designed the system so that indeterminacy and variation is at the center, working strictly against many issues of, say, aesthetics of control in gaming design and things like that. Like never holding the sensor with the hand, distributing it on the body, never having that Cartesian space to navigate, something that is morphing all the time, and a number of other things. So there are many issues here that are working against control aesthetics in design. So in this period, of course, I am still kind of, even though skeptical more and more, but hoping that one can do critical reappropriations of technology, which is most people. You will see later how I'm moving towards the refusal side of things. So you see here the sensor as the phone as sensor, but always inviting the cue for improvising is that the more varied your torsions, the more interesting the output. The more subtle they are, the more interesting the whole thing. So there's no cue for improvising. It's the opposite, say, of the choreography of a video game. It's the more subtle the variations. The torsion is very important with this sensor, the accelerometer. So it's inviting the body to discover new torsions, new sensations, new proprioceptions, new muscular fluctuations, new sensations of the body movement. So these are all tweaks about how to this idea of re-embodying these kind of disembodied digital technologies, right? And reintroducing indeterminacy in them. So, of course, yeah, that's possible to a certain extent, but only in a very superficial manner. I mean, in the sense, maybe we can come to that later, in the sense of the whole unsustainability of the technology at large, from, the extractivism behind me building a microchip, for example, a whole radically unsustainable technology that is behind computation systems, to the more general toxicity it has for the society at large. I mean, as techniques that are about world reduction and control, they always favor homogenization. This is the deeper side behind the already problematic aspect of how companies design social media, for example, as something that favors just making money and then just favors polarization and so forth. And then not only, it's the whole issue of, so I was mentioning the social unsustainability, the environmental unsustainability, and then I'm missing the third element, skipped out. Well, we will come back to it for sure. But so, these are just questions that I was already asking myself, and now I ask them myself more and more and more, right? In trying to understand how uncertain, to say the least, it is that one can really reappropriate anything. I even, as the last chapter of this whole development, because I have always refused VR, just like I refuse AI. But I knew since the beginning that this 3D, which I started since 2003, so for 23 years I've been doing this 3D project, developing my software with programmers and so forth. And I always avoided doing it strictly in VR form. I always projected like in not on flat surfaces, in these mobile structures and this kind of thing. It's like a weird, low-tech anti-VR. But finally, I wanted to see how it looked like. So we did a test, a beta version with our programmer in France in VR, and it was interesting to see. This was like an ironic goodbye. Like say, before I throw it in the dustbin, I do the VR version, and then goodbye. You see? But for similar reasons, that's why I have the refusal for AI. And this has to do partly with the distancing myself from the things that present themselves as the hype, as the seductive side of something that is profoundly fascist, that is profoundly problematic, that is profoundly transforming the society in the worst possible direction one can have. And VR and AI are top of the things that are doing that today, and that are promoting extinction, as I say. But of course not only. But say, the more the technology is presenting itself as the hype thing that everyone must talk about, that everyone must go into, the more I am reluctant to enter. So this is the more interesting part, the chorus, the dance, the collective dance. This is really what should be concerning us as a species, if we are a species. I don't think we are, but if we were. Or if you think you are. Dance, the collective dance. These are images of collective choral dances from the Paleolithic until today. And so this is like putting together this idea that the spine of societies is moving together. And this makes no distinction with non-human. Like also birds do it far better actually. So dance here is more about kinesthetic richness. Not about a human activity of a rational mind. This is bullshit. And so there I've done a lot of research, and this is a long subchapter of my book, or philosophical, from which between differentiating different kinds of choral dances, like this more disaligned Dionysian dance. This is a beautiful depiction of Dionysian Thiassos from about 340, if I remember correctly, BC in Athens. But so I relate this always to cosmology, you know. So in nature, everything comes also in choruses, in swarms, if you want, from swarms of subatonic fluctuations to swarms of galaxies. This is how things come about, you know. It's always swarms of fluctuations, and this is what you also then end up having in flocks of birds or in human societies. But then the problem is when these flocks get too aligned, which is what we have unfortunately been doing for a few millennia. So when this open-ended, indeterminate collective movement becomes excessively geometrically aligned, impoverished, homogenized, this is what I see as the core of the eco-social collapse that we've been creating. Because life, as I understand it, as I present it in my philosophy, and pretty much in accordance with what scientists are saying today, even if they don't push it into an ontological revolution as I do, but if you look at what biological sciences or physics or so forth are saying, life is about, first of all, okay, you will always hear this concept of biodiversity. What does this mean? So diversity is the core issue. This is very interesting, right? This is a revolutionary statement. And then the other core thing that we know already since 1902 with Kropotkin, but then not many people pay too much attention to this, is that the core evolutionary law is not the struggle, the individualistic struggle of the fittest, like Darwin and neo-Darwinism told us, but cooperation and symbiosis. This is the real primordial law, together with diversification. So this, I come up with this concept of metavirus, which means life is about symbiotic variation or relational mutation. This is how life has flourished in the biosphere. It's never of individuals, it's never of species, it's about meshes of symbiotic exchange, which are about a never-ending mutation. What have we been doing for 10,000 years in the biosphere, more or less? In an exponentially growing form, exactly the opposite. Ubiquitous fragmentation instead of symbiosis, ubiquitous homogenization and monocultures of humans, plants, non-human animals, materials, and so forth, everywhere in the biosphere. It's a catastrophe. We have unleashed the quickest mass extinction that has ever been recorded in the history of the Earth. This is the degree of destructive power of current human civilization. It's an unprecedented event in the history of the Earth in its destructive power. This is, therefore, the biggest evolutionary failure. So it's an accident, it's not teleology, it's not, as human supremacism tells us, oh, this is the necessary and unavoidable step of any intelligent evolution of life, maybe towards even something beyond it, as transhumanists will say, the post-human, enhanced from this trash human technology. So what transhumanists speak about enhancement, I call it trash human unenhancement. The technologies that transhumanism tells us are enhancing us, I say they are making us far worse. They are making us lose all our capacities. Like AI clearly is creating a massive capacity. This was the third one I wanted to raise later. So AI is also inducing a massive homogenization and loss of capacities of creativity, of thinking. We are seduced by the comfort, like always. It's always about the spectrum of comfort. And so we ignore the fact that this is creating massive homogenization of thinking because it's simulations of simulations of simulations in a ever-impoverishing loop. And we don't realize that they are taking out all our capacities, the few ones we had left, because we've been losing capacities through externalization techniques for many thousands of years already. So of course, like, it extends far beyond AI. What I call the algorithm in the age of algorithms and extinctions is at least as old as the Neolithic, but maybe even older. And so when understanding techniques and technologies, I completely oppose the idea that techniques are neutral algorithmic techniques are by principle reductive. They are about reducing the indeterminacy of the world to something controllable. And this is the ontological problem of technology. This is what is driving us to extinction. Full stop. There's no thing there to save. So at stake is to regain the opposite, a revitalization of indeterminacy, variation, and symbiotic relations in our ways of living. This cannot be done through using this media. This can only be a provisional step. Because, okay, even today, if we want to share the idea with anyone, it's hard to do it without some kind of partial use of some of these techniques. Even a book is problematic as a technique, for example. Or a knife, as we were saying yesterday. Cutting, even not just killing, but cutting through a knife is also part of this history of homogeneous interventions, of aggressive interventions. Right? So I'm in favor. My project as becoming a naked nomad gatherer of plants that lives outdoors is to be able, I don't know if I will be able to reach that, but to be able to live outdoors just with the body, not a single tool, not even a fire. I think since we started this systematic externalization, including fire, which was a radical tool for modification of the environment linked to hunting and then, of course, livestock, what has deforested the world has been basically deforesting through fire for extensive livestock systems since at least 5,000 years, for example. People don't, until you study this, it's pretty clear when you study it, but until then, we are missing the broader picture, which is what I try to put together in the theoretical side of my work. So, okay, in this European project, we were developing a lot of things around these forms of open-ended collective movement, so never based on imitation, because many dances, like here you see a bit of the differentiation between disaligned dances and aligned dances. I propose, following some archaeologists as well, that the aligned dances came up in the Neolithic, where dance still had the fundamental role of teaching us synchronized movement, which came up for the first time on the history of the earth in the Neolithic, associated to large-scale work, like building pyramids, plowing, and a number of other things. This didn't exist before, right? Dance was foundational at that period still. So the role it had always had in human societies for giving cohesion to the society, for organizing the society, for transmitting knowledges beyond narrative. This was always the dance, and it still is in nomad gatherer hunter societies. It's the central aspect of the society is the dance. But in the Neolithic, it still had this for a period at the beginning, and then it got lost when in the agrarian empires like Egypt and so forth, dance became, professionalized, right? And so people stopped, and except in Greece, this is the last major example of a society where a collective choral dance was central to the society. But then this also disappeared. So there was this whole extinction of dance, which is linked to the extinction of life in the biosphere, because it's linked to this homogenization of movement. So now what choreographs us is machines themselves. We don't dance together. It's machines choreographing us more and more. Now, to the point of an almost matrix-like situation where we're almost immobile and then just clicking on screens for now, but people like Elon Musk will have just, like Matrix, just with an implant on your brain and then nothing more. You don't exist as a body. This is the whole history of the hatred for the body that we need to reverse, with all these psychotics still fighting for it. Anyway, so I think I need to round up because we are only over time. So just a couple of words. So this extinction metaformance that I was presenting yesterday is the fourth one in a series. And so here I start with the parts of it's what I call the trial against humanity. This is part of my book. That's how the book starts actually. And then, in this case, followed by this new manifesto, which I will try to briefly read or parts of it now for the discussion. And then people are invited to sign a human supremacism resignation form. So only those who pass, who resign to the human supremacist status are allowed to participate in the Metaformance, which means I no longer do things for humans. I have no interest in doing things for humans. For me, human supremacism and human status is the same thing. This is another big conversation, of course. Some people think, no, one thing is human supremacism, another is humanity. I don't think so. The concept of human is strictly itself supremacist. This would be itself a big conversation. But anyway, so in a general sense, I'm no longer interested in doing things of humans for humans. I don't consider myself human, like I don't consider myself binary gendered, like I refuse these kinds of conceptions. And I propose situations where I get other people to consider the possibility of disaligning from these constructs as well. So people who accept the possibility of disaligning from this, they pass into the final experimentation, which is this more collective experience of entangled movement and sensation and so forth. And then finally, this the film that I have there in the exhibition. I invite you to see it before the exhibition closes. It's very long, it's 40 to 48 minutes. The text is made first, the first kind of 8 minutes are this new manifesto I wrote for the exhibition here entitled Refusal of AI, a BI Revolution Manifesto. BI is body intelligence. This is something I developed in my theory a lot as a central concept. So in this you have first this manifesto, then you have for another 40 minutes readings from my book trilogy on hackers. It's very performative readings. And in the background you have mostly images of, it's a documentary almost, if that exists. Of course it's always fictional, but kind of documentary of recordings I've made of myself doing my improvisations during my winter rewilding in the coast in Spain every day. So it's like sharing really that kind of mutation. It's my real practice, it's my real current transformation. So I don't know if so here I have put down a few questions for provocation, for debate that we can go. I don't know. I guess it's too late for reading the manifesto, right? Yes. So yeah, for them just like I start like basically assuming the contradiction of speaking about that which I wanted to avoid, then explaining why AI is a dangerous and fascist fallacy, why it has no future, why it deletes the future and fuels extinction, why it impoverishes us, why it solves nothing, it has no good sides, why its promises are false, why we should stop paying so much attention to it, giving it credit, assuming its false inevitability, trying to make it good. And finally, I'm just summarizing the titles, right? Finally, why we should take distance from it, refuse it, and work on something else instead. A return to the body and its body intelligence, a source for a deep transformation towards a planetary regeneration and a livable future during the already upcoming collapse, the already started collapse. So, okay. I think we can. Did I answer your question?
Not fully. You told me that you refused, and how was the process of refusing going on? But what was the triggering point? How did it happen that you decided to go this way? This I still don't know.
But as I said, I was always critically working with symbologies, right? So, and I've always refused some part of it because this is part, I guess, of my personality. I've always been refusing what seemed to be the hype and what everyone was going along with. And with the other things that were more minoritarian, I was anyway always skeptical and critical. But the more I have been going into the sources of the eco-social collapse in my research in the last years, where my philosophy also became more radicalized in terms of being more consistent and more coherent than it was before, the more I was aware of how fallacious it was to pretend that one could really reappropriate anything. It's a fallacy, it's a myth. You can't reappropriate anything, it's just a surface effect. It's just feeding again and giving credit to that which is taking us to extinction. So it's just a deeper awareness that I have been raising in my mutation, in my evolution, and becoming fed up of being just part of the killing machine and of the hypocrisy of human cultures. This is maybe the turning point.
Okay, thank you. Now I get it. So maybe in place of my questions, as we are already after the 10, I will ask you if you have any questions. I do know Jaime since some time, and we have some specific points of discussion. Generally, I'm very much often close to palliative techniques, and I discuss either human status is the same as the human supremacism. So here are our two major points, but I would like you also to join this discussion.
And if not, we can stage or no, it's interesting to stage the difference. But before, of course, let's see if we have any questions, comments, disagreements.
I have a question about your attitude towards the usage of new technology in your current art, and what is your attitude towards it? Because you use technology that's what I got from your talk is destructive for people, for humanity, and you still use it.
But less and less. So the idea is that this is still part of my whole trajectory. It's been the way I was trying to do it, although I no longer believe that this is really meaningful in doing so, is to try to reinfuse that in publishing technology, which is something that can be more enriching. So reintroducing this richer corporeality and indeterminacy in the tools themselves. So this was always my intention, right? Although I don't think that this is implying now a real deep transformation of the technology itself. So what I'm doing is to gradually disalign. So I'm shifting more and more towards what only the body can do. So what I show in the video there is more my future, it's more my present, it's more my limits. It's really just, but then I share it, of course, I try to share it through workshops, through documentation, and then this implies always still, so my future prospect is to disappear as a naked nomad gatherer with nothing but the body. Again, I don't know if I will reach so far, because it's not so easy in one lifetime to go so far, right? But this is what I see as a project. Before I get there, I have a lot to develop, share, and of course this implies always some degree of complicitness with the killing machine, because, I couldn't come here without catching a plane or staying 3 days in a train, and then, I'm using a computer for showing the slides. So these are still provisional complicitness with the killing machine, but I don't see this as an unavoidable future and as something I have to push for. Like, I've been 10 years without buying a smartphone and it hardly works. But, so I still have one, but I no longer expect to buy one ever again in my life. And like this with many other aspects, I question myself every possible aspect of my complicity with the killing machine, from what I eat to everything. My multiplication, which I don't expect to have, my sedentarism. These are three major points of the vegan queer proposal, right? So the vegan side is, what we eat is the major source of disruption of the planet. Eating animals. Sedentary life, so the anarcho-primitivist aspect of going back to nomadic ways of living has to do with questioning ourselves for our toxic occupation of the biosphere through all sorts of things, like urban living, urbanization, and all the technologies that come with it, that are fragmenting the biosphere in a terrible way, in a toxic way, in a completely no future. And then the multiplication is trying to connect queerness with anti-natalism, another taboo, of course. So this are, I'm defending this in my activism these days. I have a group in Spain which is trying to fight for these unpopular issues in politics, actually. In a very kind of bottom-up politics, more anarchist than, say, asking Papa and states to do something. But, so, this idea of disalignment, it's a lifelong process where I'm still partly complicit, but never assuming this as the unavoidable future where I have to fight for my rights to always having a new computer with me and things like that.
Yes, thank you. So this is rather the kind of horizon that we are working towards. Not possible, like directly wait from now to make the radical shift, but make the radical shift within the process of the design.
I have one more. Who would you be if there were no this? Who would you be right now? Who would you be? Be if there were no destructive development of a community.
Maybe I wouldn't exist. I mean, if humanity didn't exist as a destructive force in the biosphere, if we were still what we were for most of our history, which is less than 1 million global population of nomad, gatherer, hunter communities, probably we would not be here, and none of this that we know. But why should this be a problem? I mean, of course, this is a scenario in a kind of parallel universe thing of an idea. So, given the problem, okay, we're here, and we have the urgency of discussing the problem, and then one way of doing this is with the tools of the system itself, like writing a book, criticizing the system is part of that. And then the other movement is like inventing or reinventing, recuperating other ways of existing and being that no longer require this framework of reference, which is this idea of thinking through the body with no longer using words, really enacting a different way of being in the world altogether, which is actually, I never speak about going back. For me, it's about undoing a cosmic anomaly, a cosmic geological force, a geological anomaly, an accident, an evolutionary accident that has paralyzed evolution in the biosphere. But then, what one can think of, if one is realistic, is really considering, for example, that even agriculture is unlikely to be possible in the upcoming climate instability that we are unleashing, for example. And there's a lot of science behind this claim that is mostly ignored because of the psychosis of human supremacism, basically. So the science is saying, then it gets ignored until you research it, and you need to research it without the lens of human supremacism. So when you put these things together, there's little space, I think, for pretending that none of this we know can